I'm a 32-year-old woman, and for most of my marriage, I've been navigating an exhausting relationship with my husband's family, particularly his overbearing mother and two nosy sisters. It feels like a never-ending battle to assert my boundaries while also trying to maintain peace, and honestly, I'm at my wit's end. When I first married my husband, I thought his family's involvement in our lives was just enthusiasm. My husband, who's a kind and loving partner, assured me that his mom and sisters were just a little over the top but meant well. Over time, though, their behavior started to feel less like enthusiasm and more like control. My mother-in-law never misses an opportunity to undermine me, whether it's at family dinners, holiday gatherings, or even casual phone calls. My cooking isn't authentic enough, my career isn't stable, and apparently my fashion sense is questionable. And that's just the start. What makes it worse is that she completely disregards the concept of boundaries. Early in our marriage, I'd be startled by the sound of her knocking, always unannounced, at our front door. It didn't matter if it was Sunday morning or late at night, she acted as if she had the right to drop by whenever she wanted. And if I dared to mention that we needed a heads up before she came over, she'd laugh it off or say, "Oh, I'm family. I don't need an invitation." My sisters-in-law, on the other hand, are like her shadow. They back her up on everything, creating a united front that's impossible to penetrate. They're constantly gossiping in their family group chats, where I'm conveniently excluded, and sometimes I'll catch wind of what's being said through mutual friends. Spoiler alert, it's never anything nice. The incident that finally pushed me to start questioning everything happened recently. My husband and I went on a short vacation, a much-needed break from the chaos, and when we came back, I almost didn't recognize our living room. My mother-in-law had decided to surprise us by redecorating it. The furniture was rearranged, new curtains were hung, and she'd even painted an accent wall in a color I hated. She'd apparently roped my sisters-in-law into helping her, and they'd made a day out of it. When I confronted her, her response was as dismissive as ever. She said, "I was just trying to help. Your living room needed some personality." My husband tried to mediate, but instead of taking my side, he shrugged it off, saying she probably thought she was doing something nice. I couldn't believe it. It wasn't about the living room. It was about the complete disregard for our space and our autonomy. The fallout didn't stop there. My mother-in-law started spinning her version of the story to the rest of the family, painting me as ungrateful and controlling. Soon after, my sisters-in-law began posting cryptic messages on social media about toxic people and drama queens, which were clearly aimed at me. It was exhausting to see these little digs pop up on my feed, but I decided not to respond. I thought maybe if I ignored it, things would eventually settle down, but of course they didn't. Not long after the living room debacle, my mother-in-law invited herself over for dinner, and she didn't come alone. She brought two of her friends, people I'd never met, and announced that she thought we could all get to know each other. I was blindsided and scrambling to put together enough food while trying not to lose my cool. After dinner, I told her, firmly but politely, that we'd appreciate it if she gave us a heads up before visiting in the future. She smiled, nodded, and ignored me completely. The next week, she showed up unannounced again, this time with a pie she'd baked. When I reminded her of our conversation about calling ahead, she brushed it off, saying, "Oh, I didn't think you'd mind. It's just a pie." My husband, ever the peacekeeper, tried to smooth things over, telling me she meant well and didn't understand why I was so upset. I started to feel like I was living in a parallel universe, where everyone else was fine with this madness, except for me. The lack of support from my husband was the hardest part. He'd tell me he understood my frustrations, but when push came to shove, he'd always side with his mom to keep the peace. It left me feeling isolated, like I was fighting this battle alone. Every attempt to set boundaries was met with resistance or outright defiance. I began to question whether our marriage could survive this dynamic. It's not that I didn't love my husband, I do, but his unwillingness to stand up to his family was eroding the trust and partnership we'd built. That's when I decided enough was enough. I wasn't going to keep living like this, constantly on edge and waiting for the next intrusion or passive-aggressive comment. I started devising a plan to regain control of my home, my marriage, and my peace of mind. If my husband wasn't going to stand up for us, I would. This wasn't just about setting boundaries anymore. It was about reclaiming my life from the chaos his family had brought into it. And this time, I wasn't backing down. Update 1. But yeah, I sat my husband down one evening after work, determined to have a serious conversation. I laid everything out, how his mother and sisters were interfering in our lives, how exhausting it was to constantly fend off their overbearing behavior, and how it was starting to take a toll on our marriage. He listened, nodding occasionally, but when I pressed him about confronting his family, he hesitated. He mumbled something about not wanting to create unnecessary drama, but he eventually promised to talk to them. I wasn't convinced, but I decided to give him the chance to step up. A few days later, my mother-in-law showed up at our house unannounced again. She was holding a tray of cookies and smiling like nothing had happened. When I opened the door, she cheerfully claimed she'd forgotten about the new rule to call ahead. I stood my ground and told her she couldn't come in without prior notice. Her expression shifted immediately, and she raised her voice, calling me disrespectful and saying I was keeping her son away from his family. I calmly repeated that she needed to call before visiting and shut the door. She didn't leave. Instead, she sat on the porch, muttering loudly about how ungrateful I was. When my husband came home that evening, he found her still sitting there. He looked annoyed, not at her, but at me. He told me I'd escalated the situation unnecessarily and that I should have just let her in. I was stunned. It was like everything we talked about a few days earlier had flown out the window. Feeling cornered, I started keeping a record of every interaction I had with his mother and sisters. I figured if it ever came down to it, I'd at least have proof of how far they were pushing things. Not long after, I found out through a mutual friend that my mother-in-law was planning a family meeting to address my behavior. I wasn't invited, of course. My husband didn't tell me about it either. I only found out when the friend mentioned it in passing. When I confronted him, he admitted he'd been invited but didn't see the harm in attending. He promised it was just a chance for everyone to clear the air. That didn't make me feel any better. After the meeting, his sister started sending me snide texts, implying that the family had unanimously decided I was the problem. The next blow came when I overheard my husband on the phone with his mother. She casually mentioned a family dinner she was planning at our house. She hadn't asked me or even told me. She was just organizing it like it was her own home. When I brought it up with my husband, he shrugged it off and said it wasn't a big deal. He suggested we just go along with it to avoid more tension. That was the last straw. I called my mother-in-law directly and told her the dinner was canceled. She was furious, accusing me of trying to divide the family. She threatened to cut off contact with her son if I didn't stop being so controlling. The fallout from that confrontation was immediate. My husband came home from work visibly upset. He told me his mother had called him in tears, saying I was ruining their relationship. He looked genuinely disappointed and said I was being too rigid. I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. I simply told him that if he wasn't willing to enforce boundaries, I'd have to take more drastic measures to protect my peace. He didn't say anything after that, but the tension in the house was palpable. I knew things were going to get worse before they got better, but I was done compromising my sanity for the sake of keeping the peace. Update 2. After the fallout from the canceled dinner, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I told my husband we needed to have a serious conversation. I didn't sugarcoat it. I gave him an ultimatum. Either he set clear boundaries with his mother and sisters, or I would have to consider more drastic measures, including separating. He looked shocked but agreed to have a meeting with his mother to address the situation. I made it clear I expected him to stand firm this time. A few days later, my husband invited his mother over to discuss boundaries. I stayed upstairs, not wanting to derail the conversation. I could hear her dismissive tone even through the walls. She brushed off his concerns, saying, "This is just how our family is. She's the one who needs to adjust." When my husband mentioned my frustration, she accused me of being too sensitive and claimed I was trying to isolate him from his family. After she left, my husband admitted he hadn't gotten through to her. I wasn't surprised but told him this was his chance to show me he was serious about supporting me. The next morning, I woke up to find my social media flooded with vague posts from my sisters-in-law. They wrote things like, "Some people really don't understand the value of family and sad to see selfishness tear people apart." Though they didn't name me directly, it was obvious who they were talking about. I decided to block my mother-in-law and sisters-in-law on every platform to avoid the drama. That didn't stop them, though. I started hearing from extended family members who had been contacted by my mother-in-law, urging them to talk sense into me. Some of them called or messaged, telling me I needed to be more understanding. My husband, overwhelmed by the escalating tension, began avoiding the topic altogether. Anytime I brought it up, he'd change the subject or tell me he didn't want to fight. It was clear I was on my own, so I started researching my legal options. I contacted a lawyer to understand my rights regarding the house, just in case things took a turn for the worse. Knowing I had a plan gave me a sense of control, even if it was just a small step. The situation came to a head one afternoon when I heard a strange noise outside. I looked out the window and saw my mother-in-law standing on the porch with a locksmith. She was trying to have the locks changed, claiming she had every right to enter her son's house whenever she wanted. I immediately called the police. When they arrived, she burst into tears, claiming I was treating her like a criminal. The locksmith quickly left, and the officers explained to her that she had no legal right to access our home without permission. She finally left, but not without making a scene. When my husband came home, he was livid. He accused me of overreacting and embarrassing his mother. I reminded him that she had crossed every possible line, but he didn't want to hear it. He said I should have called him first instead of involving the police. I told him I'd had enough, and that if he didn't start standing up for me, I would have no choice but to take matters into my own hands. I decided to take a week off work to clear my head and come up with a plan. During that time, my sisters-in-law started sending passive-aggressive messages to my husband, calling me controlling and saying they didn't recognize him anymore. I ignored them, but I could tell their words were getting to him. He started spending more time at work, coming home late, and avoiding me altogether. While cleaning the house one day, I found a spare key hidden in a drawer. It didn't take long for me to realize what had been happening. My mother-in-law had been using this key to let herself into the house whenever she pleased. I confronted my husband, who admitted he'd given her the key a long time ago and never asked for it back. Furious, I changed all the locks that same day. I told him that if he wasn't willing to enforce boundaries, I would. The next time my mother-in-law tried to show up unannounced, she found herself locked out. When she called my husband to complain, he told her there was nothing he could do about it. I could tell he was finally starting to understand how serious I was. I warned him that if things didn't change, separating might be the only way to protect my peace. For the first time, he didn't argue. Instead, he promised to figure out how to fix things. I wasn't holding my breath, but at least it was a start. Update 3. The situation escalated when my mother-in-law called a family lawyer. She claimed she had rights to her son's house, despite having no legal ownership or leasehold. The lawyer advised her that she had no standing, but the fact that she went that far spoke volumes about her intentions. I decided to protect myself further by officially securing ownership documents in my name. The process took a few weeks, but by the end, I had legal proof that our home was mine as much as my husband's. This step gave me a sense of control and security. The aftermath of that meeting was predictably dramatic. My sisters-in-law took to social media, accusing me of turning their brother against them. They posted cryptic messages about toxic spouses and lost siblings, which mutual acquaintances quickly picked up on. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law started calling relatives to spread lies about me, claiming I was manipulative and trying to isolate my husband from his family. It was exhausting, but I knew I had to stay focused. To protect myself, I began compiling evidence of their harassment. I saved text messages, voicemails, and screenshots of social media posts. This wasn't just for my own peace of mind. It was insurance in case things escalated further. My husband, to his credit, started cutting back on visits with his family. He avoided their calls and skipped a few gatherings, which was a significant shift. It seemed he was finally starting to see how their behavior was affecting our marriage. But then, my mother-in-law pulled her most dramatic stunt yet. She staged an intervention at a family gathering we didn't attend, inviting mutual friends and distant relatives to air her grievances. She accused me of tearing the family apart, painting herself as the victim of my control issues. A few of the attendees later reached out to me, expressing concern and asking for my side of the story. I calmly explained the situation, providing evidence of her behavior. To my surprise, some of them sided with me, admitting they had noticed similar patterns in the past. The turning point came when my husband finally defended me publicly. At another family event, where his mother tried to air her grievances again, he shut her down. He told her that he supported me and that her behavior was the real issue. It was the first time he had stood up to her in front of the family, and it shifted the power dynamic completely. His mother was furious, threatening to disown him unless he divorced me. He told her that if she couldn't respect our marriage, then he would have no choice but to distance himself from her. The fallout was immediate. My mother-in-law stopped speaking to my husband, and my sisters-in-law followed her lead. It was a temporary estrangement, but for the first time, I felt like we were on the same page. My husband's decision to prioritize our marriage over his family was a turning point, and while I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, I finally felt like we were taking control of our lives. Update 4. The rift in the family became undeniable after my husband stood up for me. My mother-in-law refused to attend any family events if I was present, making it clear she wanted no part of my life. This caused a divide in the extended family. Some supported her stance, while others stayed neutral or quietly sided with us. My sisters-in-law tried to mediate by suggesting compromises, but their efforts only worsened the situation. They constantly sided with their mother, insisting I should apologize and make things right. Despite the tension, my husband and I began attending events without my mother-in-law. For the first time, we enjoyed a sense of freedom at family gatherings. Without her overshadowing everything, I had the chance to bond with a few extended family members. They admired my strength and even shared stories of how controlling my mother-in-law had been in the past. Their support was a welcome surprise and made the gatherings more enjoyable. A few weeks later, my husband and I received a letter from my mother-in-law. She apologized for her behavior but didn't take responsibility for anything specific. It was more of a sorry if you were offended letter than a genuine apology. My husband thought it was a step forward and wanted to meet her to discuss reconciliation. I wasn't as convinced but agreed to a meeting, cautiously hopeful that things might improve. The meeting started on a civil note but quickly turned tense. My mother-in-law apologized again, but it was clear she didn't fully grasp the boundaries we had set. She made offhand comments about how she was only trying to help and didn't understand why I took everything so personally. I reiterated our rules for future interactions: no unannounced visits, no meddling in our decisions, and no undermining me in public or private. I also made it clear that any overstepping would have consequences. She nodded along but looked irritated, as if she was agreeing just to end the conversation. My sisters-in-law, meanwhile, were begrudgingly following suit. They stopped posting cryptic messages on social media but remained cold toward me. Their interactions were limited to polite exchanges, which I was fine with. I wasn't looking for a friendship with them, just respect. My husband, for his part, consistently enforced the boundaries we had set. Whenever his family pushed back, he stood firm, proving that he was fully on my side. But my mother-in-law wasn't done testing us. One evening, she showed up uninvited, claiming she just wanted to drop something off. My husband intercepted her at the door and firmly told her she couldn't come in without prior notice. She tried to argue, but he didn't budge. Eventually, she left, clearly upset, but it was a turning point. For the first time, she realized that the rules applied to her, too, and that my husband wasn't going to let her walk all over us anymore. After that incident, things began to settle down. My husband and I finally felt a sense of peace in our lives. The constant drama had lessened, and we started to rebuild trust in our relationship. One evening, he thanked me for my patience and resilience throughout the ordeal. It felt like we were finally on the same team, and it was a relief to know that our hard work was paying off. To celebrate our newfound independence, we started planning a vacation, a trip just for the two of us. It was something we hadn't done in years, and the idea of escaping everything, even temporarily, felt liberating. Around the same time, we received another letter from my mother-in-law. This one was different. It was heartfelt, apologetic, and free of excuses. She admitted to overstepping and expressed a genuine desire to make amends. We decided to take things slow. Reconciliation was possible, but it would be on our terms. For now, we were focused on enjoying the peace we had worked so hard to achieve. Update 5. Looking back on everything we went through, it's hard to believe how far we've come. The journey wasn't easy, but it transformed our marriage in ways I never imagined. My mother-in-law and sisters-in-law, once constant sources of stress, are now distant but respectful. They've learned to respect the boundaries we set, and while our relationships may never be close, the peace we've gained is worth it. My husband has been my greatest supporter throughout this transformation. Once hesitant and afraid of confrontation, he's grown into someone who prioritizes our marriage above all else. He stands firm when it comes to boundaries and doesn't let his family's guilt-tripping tactics sway him anymore. It's a relief to know we're truly a team now, something that felt impossible not too long ago. A few months after the chaos settled, we got the happiest news: we were expecting our first child. This added a new layer to our dynamic with his family. Predictably, my mother-in-law reached out cautiously, expressing a desire to be part of her grandchild's life. I made it clear that her involvement would be on our terms. There would be no unannounced visits, no undermining my parenting decisions, and no drama. Surprisingly, she respected the rules. She's been careful not to overstep, and while I remain cautious, her effort hasn't gone unnoticed. My sisters-in-law have also started to rebuild their relationship with me, though it's been a slow process. We've had a few civil conversations at family gatherings, and while the trust isn't fully there yet, it feels like progress. Extended family members who once took my mother-in-law's side have also started to shift their support toward us. They've seen the effort I've made to keep the peace and have started recognizing the toxic patterns that were at play before. Through all of this, I realized how many people struggle with similar issues in their families. I started mentoring others in online forums and local support groups, sharing my experiences and the lessons I learned about setting boundaries and standing firm. It's been incredibly rewarding to help others navigate situations like mine, and it's given me a sense of purpose beyond just resolving my own family drama. My mother-in-law, to her credit, has shown consistent effort to mend her ways. She's far from perfect, but her behavior has improved significantly. We've reached a tentative truce, and while I'll always keep my guard up, I'm cautiously optimistic about the future. One of the most satisfying steps in our journey was renovating our home. We turned it into a true sanctuary, a space that finally feels like ours. We updated the living room she once redecorated without permission, transforming it into a reflection of our style. Every time I walk through the door, I feel a sense of pride in how far we've come. One evening, as we were finishing the nursery for our baby, my husband turned to me and apologized. He admitted he should have stood up for me sooner and promised that he would never let anyone come between us again. It was a heartfelt moment, and though I had already forgiven him, hearing him say it meant the world. As I sit here reflecting on everything, I feel a deep sense of triumph and gratitude. Boundaries didn't just transform our marriage, they gave me back control over my life. It's a lesson I'll carry with me forever, and one I hope to pass on to our child. Life isn't perfect, but it's ours, and that's more than enough for me.